Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, it's hard to believe, but icons are people too. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to assume that you do, because you're listening to us right now. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Amazon, Apple, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. And also, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to follow us on the social media, as the kids call it. I'm getting old, so I can do that. So you can find us on the Facebook, the Twitter, and the Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of updates. And finally, and I say this a lot, but it's most important, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, film festivals, video on demand, the moving image at large, basically, because if we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come and read about it and listen about it. So please stop on by. You know, on this episode, it's a bit of a mic drop. I'm not gonna lie. The person we got to talk to is been a bit of an inspiration, but also just I've been a fan of his work throughout the years. And there is actually a new documentary chronicling his life. It is called Clerk, and it is the story of one Kevin Smith, who went from New Jersey indie filmmaking to building his own empire of nerddom, as it were. And I mean, he is a fascinating and sort of inspiring guy, and we talked about not just the documentary, but sort of his ups and downs along the way, and most importantly, why Jay and Silent Bob Go to Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is just might be one of the best movies of his career, and it's turned into a bit of a cult classic that even he is surprised that people love. But ladies and gentlemen, the man I'm talking about is Mr. Kevin Smith, as I said, and we had a fantastic conversation, but you should check out the documentary, which is available on all VOD platforms now, from director Michael Ingram, which is called simply Clerk. But enjoy our talk with Kevin, because he was a delight, and I enjoyed the hell out of it, so I hope you do too. Well, Kevin, obviously, like I said, thank you so much for the time, and just I'm a big fan. Congratulations on all the work. Congratulations on the doc. Malcolm did a great job. Now, I guess my first question is for you. How did someone who is basically a mentee who you'd worked with before pitch you on telling your story?
Malcolm, you know, he's a documentarian, and I produced some of his stuff, like Small Town Gay Bar, I think I have my name on. He's, you know, clearly he knows what he's doing in terms of telling a story in time, or a life story, outside the fiction narrative realm. So, you know, we were working on this book, Kevin Smith's Secret Stash, which Insight Editions just put out. And Malcolm, I was like, hey, maybe Malcolm can write it. And I reached out to Malcolm, and I was like, they're doing this book, and they need somebody to write between the pictures, big picture book, but they need some text about the work and stuff.
Right.
You want to write it because you've been around, you've seen it all. And he was like, yeah, man, I could totally do that. And then he called me back, and he was like, what if when I went on those interviews, because I'm going to talk to people you worked with? I said, yeah. He goes, what if I brought a camera? And I was like, yeah, go ahead. And then slowly it became this documentary that Malcolm wanted to make called KS 20, I think it was, the idea of 25. By the time it was done, I would have been in the business 25 years or something. And so at first I was like, I don't know, man, they make a documentary about you, and then the world falls apart for you. You know, just when you get celebrated, that's when it all falls apart. But he was like, no. He's going, I think you've earned it. You know, Malcolm always has a pretty decent beat on my career. And he was like, look, if I thought this was uncalled for, I would tell you. He's going, but I think you can get away with having a documentary. You've been doing this for 20 years, and it's not just one thing you do. You do a bunch of things. I think we could make it work. So I was like, all right, if I'm going to trust anybody, it's going to be Malcolm. He's one of my best friends in the world. I've known him since Clerks went to the Toronto Film Festival back in 1994. That's where I met him. And he's been around for everything. He's been on almost every set and stayed the run of production. When I had my heart attack, Jennifer, my wife, was just like, what do you want? What can I do for you when I got home? And I was like, get Malcolm out here. And Malcolm came out while I was convalescing for 2 weeks and stuff. So he's always been a vital part of my life. Made sense that he would be able to kind of put a lens on my life. He's also been very like, I call him TP. There's a character in Jerry Maguire, Cuba Gooding's Jr.'s brother, who's always kind of picking on his brother, throwing shade at his brother. And I've always called Malcolm TP because he's kind of that guy. It's just like, hey man, did you see what the New York Times said about Chasing Amy? He's like, yeah, but you see what the LA Times said? That kind of thing. So he's always been a very sobering personality to be around. I've never gotten full of myself while Malcolm's around. I can promise you that. Malcolm will bring me right down to earth. So I figured, like, if anyone's going to make a documentary and it's not going to be a puff piece, like, Malcolm's been around. He knows everything. He knows where the body's buried. Let him do it. And he did such an amazing job. It's my favorite Kevin Smith film that Kevin Smith just didn't happen to direct.
Was it important for you to have those moments shown? Because, I mean, from, the obvious trials and tribulations of not wanting to be the Sundance boy to even worse stuff like Harvey and Cop Out and everything else that you've seen, was it important to sort of have it all from A to Z there?
I mean, it was to Malcolm, because I remember going, Malcolm, like, I'm certainly not bragging, but like, I do too much, I think, to be covered in a doc. How are you going to cover that all? And he's like, I'm going to lay it out chronologically. He's like, I'm just going to do it. Like, the way it happened to me, the way I experienced your career, that's the way I'm going to lay it out. So I was all for the warts and all, especially for the authenticity of it. Like, the worst thing that could happen is somebody be like, what a puff piece. So like, early on, Malcolm had decided, I'm not going to ask you about Harvey. I don't want to talk about Harvey in the doc. And I was like, how do we not talk about Harvey Weinstein in the documentary? Like, he put out my earliest films. And Malcolm was like, his story's told. This is your story. We don't need to include him. And I was like, fair enough, as your doc. Then when I saw the doc after it was done, the first cut, I was like, Malcolm, I feel like it's like ignoring the elephant in the room. I feel like we should go back and put in some stuff about Harvey. Like, I feel like I got to address it. And we got into like a fight over it, where we didn't talk for like a while. Like, as a filmmaker, he was insulted. He's like, quit trying to control my movie. And I was like, Malcolm, I'm not trying to control your movie. This is my life we're talking about. He's like, it's my movie. And then I remembered that not only was I dealing with my friend, I was also dealing with a filmmaker who had a narrative, a story that they had that they wanted to tell. And, even though it's like, I can see my life story a little differently than he did. Like, we're generally always on the same page, but that instance was one of those moments where it took a while for us to get on the same page, for him to like go like, yeah, all right, we'll put some Harvey stuff in. I've never asked for anything to be taken out. I was always like, we got to put this in. We got to, like, the other thing was about my dad. I was like, I need to have more about my dad in there, because without my dad, I don't even start this journey. Like, I love my mom and she's alive, but like, my dad is dead and he can't speak for himself, but like, he's the genesis of all this and stuff. So we were able to go back and kind of put in some stuff about my dad that wasn't in the first cut. So, it was once I saw what he was going for, which is like, I'm going to try to do it all. Then I got greedy, where I was like, well, now we got to put this in, and we can't leave this person out. And what about this? But Malcolm, thankfully, and his editor, particularly, were able to sift through just mountains of footage. I mean, never mind the outside extraneous footage, as you can hear right here. If you put me in front of a camera or a microphone, hours of blah, blah, blah. I love the sound of my own voice. And so him and Sean Malcolm and Sean had to go through the entire, no lie, 25 hours of just me talking about my life in order to shape it down. And at a certain point, I didn't feel the right to be like, Malcolm, that's not the way I would do it. I trusted this guy to tell the story of my life. And I'm so glad he did it. He did a beautiful, beautiful job.
No, I mean, there's a line that you said in the film that I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. I mean, it was from some of your earlier Sundance meetings. Someone in Hollywood said, listen, Kevin, Hollywood isn't about making movies with your friends. And you said, fuck it. No, I'm going to spend the bulk of my career proving you wrong. I'm kind of curious, when for you was the fuck you moment? When was the, you know what, I'm going to do what I want?
Wow. I mean, I started indie, like as an indie filmmaker, and it's such a big part of the brand, right? Like, hey man, we're not Hollywood. We do what we want to do. So there was already a kind of like rebellious streak. And I'm not like, I never thought of myself as a counterculture person. I never thought of myself as like a radical or revolutionary. I always thought I was pretty standard and you know, vanilla and shit. But the movies spoke otherwise. Like and it never occurred to me because in my world, everyone was like that. Like we all spoke that way. We all obsessed about pop culture. There's nothing noteworthy. I wanted to make Clerks just to capture it, to be like, this is what my world looks like. You know, I'd seen Richard Linklater's world with Slacker. And so I was like, well, this is my world where I come from. But I never thought that like, that it was, you know, out like, oh my God, this is on the edge or something like that. Others had to say that. And then, and still, even to this point in my career, like, I don't feel revolutionary. I don't feel like I'm, you know, always pushing at the edge of the envelope. I just know that I can't do it like they do it. Like, I just, that doesn't appeal to me. So I think the moment, the real like, fuck it moment is late in the career, man. It's probably post Cop Out. Like, cause Cop Out kind of broke me. Working with Willis was tough, and he's just not, I'm there for the love and like, I believe in art and oh my God, but like we're good, we're adults and we get paid to make pretend for a living. Isn't this great? And he was having none of that. He was over that. He'd been in the movie business longer than me. And so he was done. So there was no joy in Mudville. It was there for a paycheck. And that was the first time I'd ever collided with a paycheck player. Everyone I'd ever worked with in my career was like there for the love because nobody was really getting paid. So working with somebody who was just like, I'm just here to execute, not elevate, really kind of broke me. And after that, I was like, I went, you know, like this is, and there's no disrespect to Bruce and no disrespect to Warner Brothers, but I got to the top, right? Like, you want to work with a studio and you want to work with famous people. And I got to the top of the mountain and I was like, this is the view. Like, this is what I was working for. I will jump off this mountain and go work with Jason Mewes for the rest of my life. So that was kind of it right then and there. And it was all in the same corridor of like South by Southwest happened, not South by Southwest, Southwest Airlines, but I got kicked off the flight. Cop Out happened at that point and stuff. Right around there, like it was when I was like, you know what? And it wasn't like fuck everybody. It was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna do me. Like I spent a large part of my career trying to please others because Clerks was absolutely made by critics. Like the critics writing, smart people writing about Clerks, that's how it got attention in the first place. And so since we were Miramax kids, it was always about like, you got to get the critics, man, critics. And at that point, that was when I was like, you know, I very immaturely, like at one point was like F critics and stuff. But what I eventually came around to was just like, it's not them. They're not the problem. The problem is I care too much about what they say. I was indoctrinated with, hey man, we need those reviews or else what's it all for? And I just reached a place where I was like, look, I know how this is going to go. Some people are going to like it. Some people are going to hate it. And that's the same as it ever was. I've now done this enough times where, you know, sometimes the ratio is more than the other. It's like more people like it than hate it. You know, if you make a thing, you put it out there, you're going to get reaction. And I suddenly kind of let go of that, where I was like, all right, now I'm just going to do it for me. That's how I started. Like Clerks wasn't made going like, what will the critics think? It was made going like, I just want to see this thing. And I kind of eventually got back to there.
Well, I mean, Clerks and I mean, Richard's film was Slacker. I mean, that era of Sundance, filmmaking felt attainable. And I mean, I'm kind of curious because obviously you've been doing the speaking tours and the live shows. And I'm sure this question comes up, but how do you quantify that level of attainability? Because I mean, making movies always feels like this grand thing. Like, what was sort of the light switch that went, wait a minute, I can actually do this?
When I saw Slacker, it just didn't seem challenging. And you know, I don't mean to take away anything from the movie. It's a brilliant film, but it was made by human beings. Like all movies I'd seen up to that point in my life looked like they were made, you know, by gods. You know, everything crisp, clean, huge, larger than life. Star Wars, you know, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Blues Brothers, Animal House, like these looked like movies. And Richard's movie looked like a movie I could make. Like I wouldn't have made his exact movie, but it didn't have the spit and polish. It didn't have the stars. It didn't have the very simple 3-act structure. It was just this magnificent individual that was itself and made no apologies and didn't try to be something else. And that really spoke to me. I didn't make a movie nearly as good as Slacker, but Richard's movie made me feel empowered. The same way that, like, ever since Clerks has come out, I meet people who are like, your movie made me do X, Y, or Z. I became a filmmaker, or I did this because of Clerks. It's an empowering film. So like Richard, like I don't think he intended to, but he empowered me. And then I made Clerks, and hopefully I know it's empowered like a bunch of people. And that era seems to be gone. You know, like I'm not saying I'm the last, but there aren't really no more Cinderella stories coming out of indie film because of the rise of YouTube, TikTok, social media. Now you don't have to, you know, make a movie to be noticed or capture somebody's attention or maybe start a career. You can do something as quick as, you know, be on a skateboard and lip sync to Fleetwood Mac, man, and our man's got a whole career out of that. So it's not like, you know, I never feel like I did anything special. I just think I was the last through the door, one of the last through the door, because a minute later, the DIY culture would go nationwide, worldwide. Like if DIY was very indie film, and then that indie film sensibility, you know, helped create YouTube and so forth and so on, in terms of people being like, well, I'm not famous or talented and I don't have money, but I want to do a thing, pick up a camera and start making a thing. So I got lucky, man. If I had made that movie a year later, or 2 years later, like I would have been one of many young creators that you would have heard about only if you went to YouTube or something like that. I had the benefit of being at the right place in the right time. Disney had just bought Miramax, and there was all this talk in the business about how, oh, Miramax is going to go soft now. They're not going to do cool movies like The Crying Game or The Piano anymore. And so an example had to be made. Miramax went to Sundance going like, we need to buy the most American indie film we can, you know, the more grungy, the grungier, the better. And
right.
It was Clerks. And not only did it look like hell, didn't look like a Disney movie, but it did not sound like a Disney movie either. So I had the benefit of like somebody picking up my movie and putting Disney dollars behind it. That's why, like, you know my name, because Miramax was owned by Disney and they paid publicity. They put me out in the world. I traveled, I promoted and stuff. And they don't do that anymore so much. So like, you know, I realized that like, oh man, I'm one of the last of a dying breed. It's not like they don't have filmmakers galore, but now filmmakers come out of the commercial world. They come straight from film school, and some of them are coming out of the world of YouTube and TikTok as well.
Well, and I mean, I think that sums up beautifully in the line you had for Jason Reitman. It's like, fucker, you grew up on the set of Ghostbusters, and I'm the one who inspired you.
Crazy, man. Like that's the thing. Like it's something has to speak your language. There's a kid who like literally grew up on giant movie sets, but that was his dad's work. And it's not like he didn't like it, but it didn't speak to him as something he could do, but Clerks did. He saw that and he's like, that's me and my friends do the same thing. And that enables him, empowers him to go like, I'm going to try this. I love that. That's the legacy of Clerks, man. Like it's a gift that keeps on giving. Don't get me wrong. But the legacy of Clerks is the fact that like I have met hundreds of people, if not thousands by now, who became artists because they like watched that and it lit something in them the same way Slacker lit something in me.
Now, I mean, there's one thing I got to ask you just to start putting a bow on this, because I'm a big fan of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of the time, and I will now refer to them as Morris Day and the motherfucking time until the end of time. But can you talk a little bit about just that movie and just some of the sort of phrases that you put into sort of pop culture lexicon, like Morris Day and the motherfucking time, or even something like ass to mouth? That conversation will still go on.
Right. That's all credit goes to like Jason Mewes, Mewes, who has long been my muse, Muse. He, you know, everything about Jay literally comes from Jay. The character is who Jay was when he was 16 years old, essentially. You know, Jay's grown up, he's now a dad and stuff. But he still maintains a lot of those characteristics. And that is from my favorite version of Jay when we first met, where I was like, you're so weird, man. Like the thing I would always say long before I wanted to be a filmmaker was like, somebody should put you in a movie. Like you're like Spicoli. Like somebody should, I want to see how people outside of New Jersey think of you if you're funny or something like that. So after making, you know, Clerks, and when the movie came out, nobody really talked about Jay and Silent Bob. It wasn't until Mallrats that people were like, hey man, those are the guys who were outside the convenience store in Clerks. And then Chasing Amy built their profile. And then Dogma, Jay runs away with the movie. He steals it out from under Chris Rock, Ben, Matt. So it felt like, let's reward the kid. Like he's the most original human being I've ever met, a true American original icon. As I'm going to write a movie just for him, about him, like, and all the things he says and stuff. And it's crazy. When we did it, I remember somebody said, like one of the reviews was, this is like the most expensive YouTube fan film I've ever seen. And so that was my impression of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back for like 20 years. Like, oh, it was just me with my head up my own ass, navel gazing and stuff. Like I say it in Clerk, Malcolm's documentary. It's like the spirit of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back was, we've made 4 movies before this. Let's talk about all of them in the 5th one. And that's what we did. But it has aged so insanely well. Yeah. While I've been busy trying to destroy my career over the years, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back has quietly grown into like this cult classic, which I did not expect, you know, but it has, like, aside from like Clerks and Mallrats, it has its own weird life and sensibility. And I think it has a little something to do with where it fell in history. Yeah. We came out right before September 11th, and then September 11th happened. And for some people, this was like a bomb. Another one was Zoolander. Zoolander came out right afterwards. And like the whole world was like, what are we doing? What's happening? Like everything's changed, in particularly East Coast. The buildings have gone down. And so many people like went to the movies to try to escape and whatnot. I read about it all the time on social media, where it's like 2 days after September 11th, man, I sat there and watched Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and I felt human again for the first time in like 48 hours. So I feel like historically, like, you know, and then it came out on video like a month or two later, and we're still in that post 9/11 traumatic period. People who were looking for things to laugh, we were one of the things that was newly available. And because of that, like, I think it's aged well over the years. It just wound up being in people's VCRs and DVD players at a particular time that, like, now people associate it with good memories in terms of like, oh, that's the movie I watched with my sister after the Twin Towers dropped, and like we felt okay. Like Melissa Benoist, Supergirl, when we were working on Supergirl, I asked her, I was like, hey man, you want to be in Jay and Silent Bob reboot? And she was like, Kevin, no lie, one summer my sister and I watched Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back 10 times in 2 days. Like we had the movie and we just kept watching it and watching and watching it. So I've loved that. Like while I've been busy doing things in the present or like kind of extolling the virtues of my past with Clerks and Mallrats and Chasing Amy, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, the film least likely, has quietly gone on to find people who are like, you know what? That movie actually holds up. Like I was, of all the things I made early in my career, that was the first movie that both Richard Linklater and Robert Rodriguez were like, Kevin, this is a great movie. And I was like, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back? I was like, what about Dogma? And they're like, it's preachy. This really feels like a movie. And I guess it's kind of held up over the years.
I mean, you know what? It's because there's such self-effacing joy and honesty in it. And I think that comes through in all of your work, and it comes through in the documentary as well. And I think that's what makes it work. And I just want to say, man, keep doing you. And thank you for the time today. This was fun.
Means the absolute world, David. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks,
that's
Kevin.
very kind of you. See you later.
See ya.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. You can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.